Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's XBRL US webinar, all about the SEC's rule proposal on Inline XBRL. Our presenter today is Campbell Pride with XBRL US. He's our president and CEO. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started today. If you have any issues with audio or with the visuals related to today's presentation, please send a note to support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, @xbrl.us, and we'll try to get you squared away. For those of you that are participating in today's webinar and being evaluated for CPE related to the session, you will see poll questions at several points throughout today's presentation. I'll ask you to respond quickly to those poll questions. Once the session has completed, we'll do some reporting on it, and then we'll issue CPE certificates. Generally, that happens in about a week to a week and a half. So please be on the lookout for those poll questions today, and then for CPE certificates to be issued after the session. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Campbell Pride, President and CEO of XBRL US. He's going to walk you through the SEC's rule proposal on Inline XBRL. Campbell, take it away.
Thank you, David, and thank you for joining today. So firstly, I'll just go through the agenda for today's call. We're just going to go through, give you a little bit of an overview for those of you who are not aware what Inline XBRL is, and just give you a brief history and who's using it and how it works. Then we're going to go through the rule proposal, what the changes are, what they mean. We're going to give an overview of the actual use of Inline XBRL here in the United States. So there's been a voluntary filing program, which 66 filings have been submitted in. So we think it'll be useful just to show you how that works and some of the software that the SEC's made available to do that. Then we're going to have some CPE questions. Then we'll go through some of the questions posed in the rule. The SEC had a number of questions that the rule proposal puts forth, and just walk you through what those are, and encourage you to give your feedback on that. And then at the end of the call, we'll have the webinar. We're going to have some questions and answers. So if anything comes up, save those to the end, and then we can go through some of the questions that you may have. So firstly, just to give you an idea of what is Inline XBRL. Basically, what Inline XBRL is very simple, even though the name may sound complicated. It's really just taking information in an electronic format and compressing or consolidating it into a traditional HTML report. So really, Inline XBRL is really a way to encode in an HTML filing, which the majority of companies currently do, and have the XBRL embedded in that. So what that means is, if you change a number in your HTML document, it's going to change it in the Inline XBRL as well. The code basically just sits in the HTML document. And this is important because, one, it makes it, in theory, makes it easier. If you change a number, you're changing the same number. You're not talking about what we currently have today in the SEC filing program, is we have two separate documents. And this is one of the main advantages, that you only have one document to file. And we'll show you what that looks like on the SEC website in a minute. Just in terms of the use of Inline XBRL, that's been quickly adopted around the world for these very reasons, to remove duplication and filing. So it's been used in the UK for a number of years now. It was first introduced by HMRC, which is the tax authority in the UK, for private companies. So there's millions of private companies are currently reporting in Inline XBRL. And they're reporting every single day, both now into HMRC, which is the tax regulator, but also to something called Companies House. In the UK market, every private company is required to file once a year their financial statements. So that program has gone very well, and they've had very few problems with it. And some of the things that they've seen in that market companies actually have not to HMRC, but could voluntary file to the Companies House, and the vast majority of companies did that as a voluntary filing because it was just easier than mailing in the paper documents. It's being used in Japan as well as being proposed to be used in Europe. All public companies in Europe will have to file in an inline XBRL format. It's looking at by 2020, and the regulator requiring that is ESMA, which is part of the European Union. So that is another large group of companies who's going to be also reporting in an inline XBRL format, and that has relevance obviously to the US market. A number of those companies who have to file in Europe also already file in the US as foreign private issuers, and this is one of the things that this rule also does, is it changes some of the rules around IFRS filers. We'll talk about that as well. So that's basically the high-level view of what inline XBRL is, and it's one of the reasons that the SEC is looking to adopt it, is for some of the things we just previously discussed. So to make sure that people could file an inline XBRL, the SEC initiated in June in 2016 a voluntary filing program. So this means if you wanted to report an inline XBRL, you have been able to do that for the last 6 months. And about 34 companies have. There's about 66 filings have been filed to date with the SEC. And one of the things that the SEC did as part of this voluntary filing program was roll out something called a SEC Inline XBRL Viewer. So if you just see just a normal, if you just opened a Inline XBRL document, it would just look like a normal HTML document. But this add in the SEC provided allows you to be able to look at all the underlying numbers and do comparison and searches and find terms within a regular web browser. And so that's part of today's presentation. We'll go through that and we'll have a look at that and how to use it. And then also, if you're looking to file an inline XBRL, it can be helpful to see what's involved. So David, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the SEC has proposed a new rule on March 1st to require the use of inline XBRL in the US, and as part of that, they've posted that, and they're looking for comments from all the parties affected, and that public comment period is going to be going for a 60-day period. And that starts when the rule is posted in the Federal Register. That was posted, I think, probably on May 15th, in March 15th. So the SEC is looking for comments over the next 55 days on that, and there's a number of questions that have been asked in there. So if you have any concerns or you have any comments to those questions, you should definitely respond to that comment period. And one of the things that the SEC had proposed in the rule was, what is the reason they're doing this? And the intent is to improve data quality, which has been an ongoing problem with filings. There's a disconnect between the HTML filing and the XBRL filing. They're two separate documents. This brings them together. So if you enter a number in one, you should be able to see them the same. And that should also benefit investors. If I'm an investor, I'm looking at that document, I can then pull the data straight out of the document. It also gives investors transparency back to the original number. A lot of investors will look at this data and they'll get it through either a data aggregator or they'll get it through some data source. And when they get those numbers, and they want the ability to say, okay, let me just check this back to the original document. So Inline XBRL supports that as well. You can get this fact, you can see how it will appear in the original filing. So that's a good thing for investors. It makes it a lot more transparent. This is what the company reported. This is what this data aggregator who's pulling all this data in XBRL is providing to me. I've got a shot back to it. I can see where all this information is coming from. And obviously, and the other thing they want to do is obviously decrease the cost of preparing it. So obviously, there's costs in reconciling the two today. So a lot of those costs become easier. The review of the data should be easier. And then also to take advantage of some of the costs that have been achieved in other markets. In the UK, the average cost of producing an inline XBRL filing is about £100, which is like $150 US. So there's a lot of opportunity to further reduce the cost of putting this data in a standardized format, and then also being able to increase the benefits of having this data available. So let's just go to some of the proposed details in the rule. So the first major change, which is kind of outside of really XBRL per se, but needs to facilitate this, is the requirement that filers will be required to tag their filings in an HTML format. And probably the vast majority of companies already do this anyway, so there'll probably be limited impact. But there may be a number of small companies who today file in what's called an ASCII format, so that's just a straight text file format. There is no requirement that you actually file in HTML. The vast majority of filers have, just so you know, it's far more readable, it looks prettier, etc. But there are a handful of filers who still report in ASCII, so that those companies are going to have to transition to an HTML format. Inline XBRL is also an XHTML format, so it's has more strict requirements in terms of reporting, so that's also going to be required. But the timing specifically of filing will not change. Obviously, now that it's one filing, then they obviously have to report it together. But for mutual funds, however, there is a difference there. Today, mutual fund reports are also what's a report called the N1A, which is reported by mutual funds companies to the SEC, are also reported in XBRL. Those will have to be reported in Inline XBRL as well, but they will now have to be filed at the same time as both their regular filing and also their XBRL filing. There's a 15-day difference. That difference now is proposed to be eliminated by the rule. So the other thing that's interesting on this, these HTML documents, currently the way the SEC system is set up, you may have noticed this if you have a look at some of these filings, there's no cascading style sheets, so typically not used. Each of the values it's restricted to each individual node that's being reported. So, you know, one of the things we'll be proposing to the SEC ourselves is to allow cascading style sheets, so it should make it a lot easier to report these documents. But that's just something to keep in mind if you're in the technical nature, because that can make it a lot more difficult to file this stuff. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, please, David. So now, what's the phase-in? So from the rule, so basically from the rule being approved, large accelerated filers using the US GAAP taxonomy will have to comply in the second year after the rule becomes effective. So if the rule became effective in June this year, then you're going to have to file in the following year. So, and then the accelerated filers must comply in the third year, et cetera, et cetera. So all filers will should be filing in the fourth year after the rule becomes effective. And that'll really line it up with what the ESMA reporting is in Europe. And they'll be requiring folks to start reporting in an Inline XBRL in 2020. The phase-in approach is the reason to do this was to reduce the burden on small filers, give folks enough time to be able to adapt to the change, and also give filing agents and software vendors with small clients time to adopt Inline XBRL as well. So there obviously is going to be some transition costs to move from one format to another. So to do that, it's going to depend how much that cost is going to be. Is going to purely depend on what your current process is. So obviously people are going to have to assess that. From talking to folks already, most of the changes or most of the impact of that change is really probably going to be a workflow change process. Today, the main difference here is when you're preparing one of these filings, you can just prepare your traditional HTML filing in the past. Then let's say you had a service provider do it, give it to the service provider. They would then have to go in and then take that and put it in an Inline XBRL format. In a regular XBRL format. With Inline XBRL, the documents are the same. So there's if you prepare the HTML, you could, I suppose, give it to an outsourced service provider. You probably want to integrate it into the process because it would probably be more cost effective. So that's something you need to consider. And most of, and well, all of them actually, all of the current service providers provide XBRL services are looking at, how they can do that with additional updates to the software they provide and use. So you should definitely talk to your service provider about this and work out what's right for you. So we'll get the next slide, please, David. Okay, some of the other changes, just in who's required to report an inline XBRL. So it's the same companies that file today in XBRL. So it's all operating companies, including small reporting companies, emerging growth companies. And the addition here is going to be foreign private issuers. One of the things that happened as part of the rule, or at the same time as the rule, is that the IFRS taxonomy was approved by the SEC. So now foreign private issuers will also be able to report, or have to report in an inline XBRL format too. So that's something that changes for them. And that hopefully that will tie up with the way that this is working in Europe as well. And that is something else that we will be commenting on, and you may want to comment on it as well, is to make sure that if you're a foreign private issuer, to make sure that that ESMA and the SEC approaches are similar enough so the same filing can be filed in both jurisdictions without having to make unnecessary changes between the two filing regimes. The other thing that this does is that this proposed rule it eliminates the requirement for filers to post XBRL files on their website. So today, when you do your filing, you've also got to coordinate getting it on your website. The original intent of this from the SEC was to say, look, this is this data, it's electronic. How can we get as wide a distribution as possible for this data by putting it on our website? It's going to make it, if we make companies put it on their website, it's going to mean that this data can be more easily disseminated. In reality, what happened was, when companies looked at how people were downloading it, there was very low usage of people downloading these files from company websites. And one of the primary reasons that happened or was identified was that the vast majority of people who are pulling this data, well, everyone actually pulls it straight from the EDGAR system, or they'll take the data from a data aggregator. It would be very, very rare for someone to pull it from a website. And the reason for that is, one, you don't always know where the file is going to be. Two, it's you're going to get the most up-to-date version from getting it on the EDGAR website, and they notify you when it was filed. And three, you really only want to build one process to go and get this data, so why not just go and get it from EDGAR? And that's predominantly what's happened. So a number of companies have complained that we put this data up, no one's downloading it, and there's a reason for that. It's just that it's expensive for data aggregators to try and work out where it is, and it's expensive for filers, or time-consuming, and just another burden to put it up. So this rule eliminates that requirement. I think that's a good change for everyone. And as I mentioned earlier, it also covers mutual fund reporting is also going to be required in Inline XBRL as well, and that's the risk and return summary, or the N1A. So that's a summary of some of the changes that are embedded in the rule. So maybe we can head back over to David, and I think he's got some CPE questions for those people doing CPE for this webinar.
Thanks, Campbell. Yep, I have a couple of CPE questions for those of you that are participating to earn CPE today. Our first question: how long is the public comment period for the SEC proposal on inline XBRL? And Campbell, while I'm running the poll, if you could take a look at the Q&A box to see if there are any questions that you want to address now.
Yes, thank you.
I have we've received a question about the slides for this meeting. I'll take that one and take it out of the way. We'll post the slides and also a replay of today's webinar, so you'll have access to those look for a note that'll come out. It should come out tomorrow for those of you that are here today.
Okay, we have some questions here. The actual take-up of XBRL has been extremely small. Why will Inline XBRL change that? I'm not sure what the take-up means. If all companies are filing it, in terms of how many people are using it, that I can't really comment on. I know we have an API. We make this data available. I know we get thousands of people or thousands of calls against that. I know a number of the data aggregators are taking that data, so that data has been aggregated and sent through to Wall Street. I know there's a lot of this data that's being used for aggregated, you'll see things like data being reported in the Wall Street Journal and that kind of stuff. So that's being reported as well. I think the question has merit, though. I think it will provide one of the people who probably have not used XBRL, one of the groups that's not used has been the individual retail investor. They haven't really had access to data aggregators, pools, data feeds which are using XBRL. So for them to go and build a process to pull this data into a spreadsheet to date or something like that has been relatively limited. What Inline XBRL does is make this data a lot more accessible to people, and we'll see that in a minute, so that they can see it and get it, can make it a lot more easily for people to be able to consume the data. One of the things we're doing in an organization as well is providing free APIs to retail investors too, so that they can start to pull this data that's being filed in a much more easily way than they could in the past. So you can pull the data into spreadsheets and use it. So moving on here.
Campbell, can I pause you there for a second polling question for our CPE participants?
Sure.
Great. So our second polling question. As currently written, the rule proposal would require public companies to submit which of the following to the SEC? A single inline XBRL document, an inline XBRL document, and an HTML document, or an inline XBRL document and an ASCII text document.
While I was answering that question, I can go to there's another question we had here. Will the inline XBRL be a valid XML format, or one needs to extract the XBRL only portion separately? So what's happening today? So that inline XBRL document, that can be read by any program that can read XBRL, or XBRL enabled software can read that. So there's different tools that can use that. So you don't necessarily have to, but the SEC does, in their website, they do extract from the inline XBRL. They also automatically create the traditional XBRL instance file that have been filed in the past. So the SEC is going to make that available on the website as well. But over-the-counter software and open source software can do the same thing. So that can be done either way. The next question was, someone had asked us, how are we able to see who's filed inline XBRL documents with the SEC? At the moment, if you go to the company's website, you'll see if it's an inline document or if it's not an inline document. So you'll be able to see that. How would you go and get the comprehensive list? The SEC doesn't make available a comprehensive list of those companies that have been filed in inline XBRL. But we can certainly send out an email after this. If people are interested, let us know. We can certainly send you an updated list of who has filed an inline XBRL. So let's move back to David. Do we have any more CPE questions?
No, Campbell, we ran both of our CPE questions, and I'll turn it back to you to continue the presentation.
Thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now, and I'll just walk you through the inline XBRL viewer and how this works, and to answer some of these questions about how does this look on the SEC website. So if you can see my screen here, you can see this is a filing. This is Intuit. They filed, and they decided to file an inline XBRL in February, and you can see here, just on the traditional SEC landing page for a company, you can see here they've got this they've put IXBRL next to the document. This is the inline XBRL document here, the first one, the first exhibit. And at the bottom, you'd ask a question about, is it traditional XML? You can see here they've put the word extracted in front of it, but here's the traditional XML document or XBRL document that companies have been filing traditionally today in XBRL. So here, if you click on it, you can click on this document, you can open it. We'll just open it. And what this is doing is it's just open the document. It's an HTML document, but the SEC, when you open it from the SEC website, it also opens the SEC's inline viewer, and this is what you can see here. It's this, the viewer is being used because it's got the this blue strip above the top of it, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. If you just want to go to the SEC and you just want to get the traditional HTML document, you've got to go to this menu and you've got to say open as HTML, and this will give you the filing, which doesn't have this viewer over it. This still has the inline XBRL view in it, but it's just basically showing you as a traditional HTML filing. So the first thing you'll notice here is these red lines, although you can change the color of this, but this is just representing facts that have been represented in XBRL. So you can get a pretty good idea of, you can see pretty easily all these values have been tagged in an XBRL format. You see as I'm rolling, I don't know if you can see this on my screen, but these are coming up red as I roll over them. As you roll over them, these are red. These are like text block disclosures. These are obviously the policies, and each of them being tagged here. They've all been tagged as well. So just by looking at the document, kind of gives you some interactive view of the data. You can kind of see what's there. But and that's fine. But what they added in the viewer as well was, the ability to search on stuff. So let's say if I search on assets. This is basically going to find everything with a tag with assets in it. It then limits the facts that meet that search to 51 here. You can see there's 51 facts with assets in it. If I get rid of it, you can see in here there's 855 values that have been tagged in this document. So I'll just go back to assets. And then what that does is it just allows you to quickly see them. So anything with assets, it's putting yellow on it. Amortization of intangible assets, obviously assets in the balance sheet. And if you drop down on this, you can see it gives you just a breakdown of these items. So you can see assets current. It'll take you to this item here, which has got a value of 1614, which you put some blue box around. You can see this immediately. You can see this here. You can see it, but I can make it a little bit bigger. So then, at the same time, it drops up the attributes of the fact, and this just gives you information about the actual. The first one gives you facts itself, so this is telling you what the assets are, what the value is, the real value, what date it's reported at, what measure it's in. In this case, it's US dollars, it's in millions, it's a level of accuracy. It's a debit account. It's a positive. There's a positive sign on it. It's monetary. It also links back to what the definition is, so you can see the definition of the item. And this is seen to be quite good. If someone's looking at a financial statement and they don't know what something is, at least they get the definition from the taxonomy. They also get the links to any references that are included in the taxonomy as well. So the viewer is taking care of this. When you do your filing in Inline XBRL, you don't have to add any of this information in. This information is just being pulled by the SEC viewer. It's just compiling it from the taxonomy and what was reported in the document. The only thing that's really being reported in the document is some tags. So we can have a look at those. So if we just look at the source of this, actually we don't look at that. This is going to give us the.
Campbell, can I pause you just for one quick second? Because I've had a couple of viewers who've indicated that they're not able to see your screen. And I'm not sure why, because I am able to see your screen.
Maybe it's too small. Maybe is that the issue?
Okay. I think we're all set.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. So some of there are some changes that some things should be just aware of with Inline XBRL. Historically, in some of the filings that you would have done today, you would have only tagged the value once. In the Inline XBRL format, you can tag the same value with the tags multiple times. That makes no difference. So that is something that is kind of different in terms of the tagging process. The other thing and so that's why you may have noticed the SEC in the EDGAR filing manual a couple of, I think it was last year, late last year, they changed the rule so that you could report the same value multiple times. And that was really getting that ready for the ability to report in Inline XBRL. The other thing that the viewer allows you to do, it just allows you to do a lot of you can query this data, you can do things, hey, I only want to see text amounts, I only want to see calculations, for example, and then this will highlight those items that are actually calcs. I'll get rid of the assets on here. You can do things like I want to see negative values or whatever. On the tag side, you can see I only want to see custom tags. This is like basically what you'd see we call as extensions. So then you can quickly go through and you can see what were the things that this company created as extensions. They'll be highlighted in red. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of being able to search stuff and look at this data easily. You can then take this code that the SEC has developed. You could put this on, if you wanted to, put this on your website. You could also put the Inline XBRL viewer on your website as well, if you wanted to make it easier for people to search your data. That's something some companies may want to consider. But other things as well, if you wanted to put other data in Inline XBRL, you can do that too. So they also provide some more filters, so you can sort of filter on things like periods. If you want to see just a given year or data for a given period, you can do that too. So really what this is doing, it's trying to make data available to users and make that data available in a way that makes the financial statement information, which can be quite complicated, linked back to what the standards are, at the same time provide definitions, so it pulls all this together. But there's no work required by the filer to do that. This is kind of being handled by the SEC viewer, which is pulling all this information together. You can see here, this has only got extensions. On the panel on the right, this shows you all the items that have been subject to the search. So in this filing, you can see there's 31 extension elements, and obviously you can click on them. You can see here's the tag it's got into it, which means it's an extension for them. If the company has put a definition in, you can pull that'll come up. So it will actually pull from the companies. When you go and create a link base, the label link base that you do in your filing, this viewer will pull information from that as well. So it's pulling the definitions that the company may put in for those specific items too. So it's kind of pulling that all together. Obviously there's no references for this data, so it's not going to show anything. So that's how that works. There are some other things here in the menu. If you want someone to ask the question, if I want to get an XBRL instance, you can save this as an XBRL instance, and that's effectively the same as what the SEC is doing when they throw it on that when they put up on the website. So you can generate the XBRL instance from this as well. They have settings there, so you don't like the colors, you can change it, etc. But this kind of gives you an idea of what's going on here. You can see in terms of all the text blocks are included here. So if I click on this, I can see this is Intuit's long-term obligation text block. So you can tag text blocks, and you can see there's numbers here. So there can be tags within tags, so to speak. So you have the text block, and you'll see these items within the text block. So you have those as well. So this makes it a little bit easier in terms of you're not having to tag it in separate blocks everywhere. And here you can see it gives you what we're looking at, calculations. So I'm just going to clear all this out. So this is the SEC viewer. This is something that's provided by the SEC, but you may want to have a look at that and see how, if you're starting to do the filings. And then the underlying inline XBRL that's underneath all this is that's all basically defined in the that's all defined in the HTML, and I'll quickly show you how that looks so we can see it. This is very big. Second, it's coming up. So this is the underlying XML. In the HTML document itself, it still has a lot of the XBRL. So if you were to look at the actual code that's underneath it, it's basically all of this is hidden, but all that data is in there. So these are all the contexts that have been defined. So it's just a traditional HTML document, but all of the inline XBRL has kind of been embedded in there. And they have, and this is really complicated, but I just wanted to just give you an idea of what's going on here. There's some additional stuff you wouldn't traditionally see in HTML. There's this idea of non-fraction, and this is basically the code that's sitting in there. You can't go through and manually put all these into the document. You need some software to do it. So don't try and do this manually, because it would be very, very time consuming. You can do it for small documents, but you really need a way to be able to do that. So if you currently have a service provider you're using, you should really talk to them. And as we mentioned earlier, there have been 66 filings to date. That's been done by 4 different service providers, so they're very familiar with how you'd go about doing this. So that's kind of just what it looks like. I just want to let you can get a better understanding for how that works. And one of the things I did mention is sometimes there is data that you're required to report, but it's kind of not in your HTML filing. And there is a section in here which is basically data, which is what they call let's see if you can find it here. It's basically hidden. So there is data which is which basically means it's things like you can see here. So to find the hidden data in here, it's called additional items only, and it's things like the amendment flag, current fiscal year end date. This is information that the EDGAR filing manual requires you to report. It's actually hidden in the document, but that's just something to be aware of other information that can be reported. But you can still see that in the inline viewer by going and look for those specific tags, which is just additional information. You'll probably hear this term quite a lot, but I just want to make sure you understand what that is. Okay. So there are a couple of questions on the viewer. One question we had here was, given the new display, how does inline XBRL impact the rumor that eventually independent auditor will be required to issue an opinion for a filer's XBRL? So the current rule, and we talked about this earlier, the current rule doesn't require that this data is audited. So at the moment, there is no requirement for the actual numbers to be audited. The format of the audit opinion itself, I know that they're still discussing that, whether there should be something in the audit opinion that says we haven't looked at these inline XBRL numbers, we haven't looked at the numbers that are reported in inline XBRL. That's still being discussed. So, and that's if you're an auditor, you may want to ask the SEC that question, or if you're a filing agent, you may want to ask that question as well. But that hasn't been determined yet. And there's obvious questions that are going to be asked by that. So another question is, how is this easy to review compared to a traditional XBRL filing? I think one of the problems there are a number of issues in things like transposition errors. Whenever you're duplicating a number, you get a chance for errors to occur. So with inline XBRL, the number's only ever reported once. So that makes it easier. If I review the HTML, I'm also reviewing the data that's been reported in inline XBRL. So I think that makes it that part of the process is made easier. Another question was, how do you tag a word? I heard it's more difficult in inline XBRL as opposed to normal XBRL. So in terms of some of this, so if we look at it and see what we've got in this case and see if we can find some in this document. and something called transformations in Inline XBRL. One of the things that can be done is the SEC has released transformations, so you can basically indicate in Inline XBRL this is spelt out as a percentage or whatever it may be. The SEC has indicated on some of the initial filings if it can't be if they don't have a transformation, which basically converts something which is in a non-numerical format, that it can translate it to a numerical format. If that doesn't exist, is to basically take that word and then basically put the tag around it, but then put a number in, as a hidden number. That's something the SEC had initially indicated, but I know they're working on these transformations so that they can transform anything that's being reported into a format which is easily converted into a number. In terms of, there's another question, are there rules around when a tag can be hidden or not be hidden? Yeah, the SEC, we've had a number of webinars which are available. There's lots to go through there, which I would recommend that you go back and you have a look at. We've had, as part of the voluntary filing program, a lot of these questions were asked. And so I would recommend you go back, you can have a look at those, and the questions around how words are hidden, how they're transformed, were answered directly by the SEC. So that might be probably the best thing I'd recommend for everyone to go and have a look at if you've got more questions. We just won't have time to get through those today. So I'm going to hand it back to David, who's going to continue going through with the slides. So just me.
Great, thanks, Campbell. Actually, I'd like to break here and do a couple of poll questions. Maybe you can take a look at the remaining set of questions that have been asked today, and there are quite a few of them. While I run through these couple of polls, and then we'll come to the asks in the SEC's rule proposal, and we'll ask our attendees today for some feedback. So first, the CPE polling questions. For those of you that are qualifying for CPE today, you'll see a question on your screen that says, if the rule proposal is adopted, which of the following will public company issuers no longer need to do? Will they no longer need to submit a filing in a computer readable format, or post their XBRL filing on their website, or file their financials to the SEC's Edgar system? Which of those will public company issuers no longer need to do? Take just a couple more seconds for those of you that are qualifying for CPE today. And we'll move on to our last CPE question. Which is, if the rule proposal is adopted, which type of companies will be required to file first? Large accelerated filers, small reporting companies, or all companies will be required to comply at the same time? Just a couple more seconds for that last CPE question for today's session. And then Campbell, I don't know if you have taken a look at the remaining questions that have been asked today and want to do those, or some of those, or if you want to go to what the SEC asks for.
Yeah, let's do the SEC asks, and we'll come to the questions at the end.
Okay, great. I'm going to conclude our CPE polling.
Okay, so the SEC has asked a number of questions as part of this, and so there are 4 questions that we thought would be good for us just to get feedback from the audience today. If people can answer poll questions for these. And these are, should operating companies be required to submit financial statement information using Inline XBRL as proposed? Do you generally agree with the idea? How quickly should it be phased in? Are vendors ready for Inline XBRL from what you've seen, if you're a filer, and should the SEC eliminate the requirement to post the XBRL filings on the corporate website? So David, I don't know if you can pull up the poll for that. So the first one is, should operating companies be required to submit financials using Inline XBRL? While you're answering that one, there was one question. Can we go to the next one, David? What do you think, how quickly should Inline XBRL phased in? Do you agree with what they're currently saying at the moment, over 4 years? Or do you think it should be faster, or you don't know, or you don't care? And the next, if you want to go to the next question. So are vendors ready for Inline XBRL? And just in your opinion, do you think they're ready or they're not? We know there's 4, but if you've heard that the vendors aren't, then put no. And then should the last question is, should the SEC eliminate the requirement to post XBRL filings on the corporate website? Okay, so then, just in terms of some of the other questions that are there that we're not putting in the poll is how that the SEC is asking, and you know, if you have an opinion on this, you should definitely ask, is, you know, how will Inline XBRL affect data quality and use of XBRL data? Is the Inline XBRL technology sufficiently developed? You know, from our perspective, you know, obviously we know that it's been working in multiple jurisdictions for multiple years, so we don't really have much concerns with that. In terms of the data quality, I think it's going to, in some areas, improve the data quality vastly. In other areas, it's going to require, you know, other things to be done as well. Particularly, the SEC has specifically made the SEC renderer will still be available as well. So if you use that, so you really want to use that to make sure that, and that helps make sure that the structure is correct. So that's one of the unknowns as well. People know that. The other issue that we've seen in some of the new Inline XBRL filings was it's harder to see the date context on these things in the inline viewer, and so that's something that people just you really want to look at the SEC renderer to make sure that the numbers are lining up. So there's pros and cons, obviously. Should small companies be exempt from Inline XBRL? They've asked, the SEC's asked this question as well. I'm not really sure that traditional XBRL or Inline XBRL is going to be easy for them to comply with. I would imagine, given what we've seen in other markets, the cost of it's been relatively low. So I think it would be better for small companies. I think it's bad for investors if there's multiple ways that this data is being reported, but that's really up to small companies. If you're a small company, you should really come back and let the SEC know what you think. Are there other areas where Inline XBRL should be required? So this is really more broadly, if there's other types of reporting that's being done by companies, should Inline XBRL be used for that as well? So that's some of the questions that the SEC is currently asking. on this. So if you have any thoughts on those, I encourage you to respond to that. David, I see that if you have another CPE question, or are we done with those?
No, we did those ahead of the SEC questions.
Okay, so we had a couple of questions come in. One question was, how does Inline handle precision when you have more precise values in a table but is rounded when used in the narrative? So this is what I kind of mentioned earlier, was that you can actually report multiple values with different precisions in Inline XBRL, so that you can actually report both, and that's not going to cause a problem anymore. As long as the precisions line up. You can't report assets of 100 in one place and assets of 1 million in another place. That'll give you an error. But if it's 100 versus $100.23, that's fine. The next question was, is the Inline XBRL viewer available in open source? Yes, it is. You can take that, you can use it, you can change it, you can do anything you like with it. There was one company I had seen had taken the Inline XBRL viewer and then had also overlaid that historical data for each of those concepts for any given company. So you could open up the Inline XBRL viewer, the SEC viewer, and you could scroll over a number, and it would show you the historical trend for that number for any number in the filings, which was kind of cool. So, and I think this is one of the ideas the SEC wants to be able to do, is to be able to make it much easier for this data to be compared and to be viewed, and to give the average investor a much more pleasant experience in terms of being able to understand the information. And then hopefully, obviously make it far easier and make it more for people to invest and feel more comfortable investing and feel they've got a better understanding of how the company works. Will IFRS be mandated as Inline XBRL for the SEC? Yes. That is the intent. So this obviously applies to everyone. The foreign private issuers will be required to file, I believe it's later this year. So in theory, it would probably make sense for them to go straight Inline XBRL rather than doing something different if you're a foreign private issuer. Can you name the 4 service providers who are ready for Inline? I know there's 4. I don't actually have their names here in front of me at the moment, so I can't really answer that. But there are, and that doesn't mean there are only 4 who are ready. That just means there are 4 companies who have already done filings that we're aware of, who have done filings in Inline XBRL. And I know all the filing agents have plans to support Inline XBRL. So if you want more specific questions, you probably should ask your filing agent that question. Another question was just around hidden facts in the inline document. And the question was, I'm being asked if there will always be hidden facts in an inline document. And basically the answer is yeah, there's going to be the things that you've typically seen in the SEC's DEI section, which is just information about the filing. They're going to be hidden facts. And there are probably going to be other things as well. The FASB is rolling out something called extensive list facts. Some of that which give more information about something you're reporting. They're likely going to be in a hidden field as well. So, and that's really data that makes it easier for a computer system to be able to consume the data. So yeah, that will be, they'll probably be there as well. It's unlikely, it's going to be impossible really for you not to have hidden facts in the document. Another question was, can HTML and XBRL data be separated for Inline XBRL, for iXBRL? If it's reported in Inline XBRL, it can be separated into HTML and XBRL. That's definitely possible. You can't come with an HTML and an XBRL and automatically create an Inline XBRL document. You can't go that way, just because there's formatting information and placement information that is lost when it was put in XBRL and HTML. And that's one of the advantages of Inline XBRL. You kind of got all the information together. You can go and look at it and the underlying document, and you can get context for it if you want to drill down into something more deeply. And that's really useful for investors, and it should make a lot more of this data available to people in an easy to consume way. So I think that's all the questions that we currently have. That I think I've got most of them. So I'm just quickly looking through there. So another question. Yeah.
Maybe while you're taking one last look through at those questions, I'll show folks where they can go to start the comment process for their comments on Inline XBRL.
Yeah, that'll be great.
Okay, give me just one quick second.
And while David's doing that, there was one last question here that I'll ask just on continuation. Basically, in these Inline XBRL filings, you have some text block tags which go over pages. These are called continuation blocks, and so there were some problems early on in the SEC viewer on how they were handled. But for those of you who are aware of this, those problems have been resolved. Other items, just in terms of, David's showing this, just tell us when you're ready, David. In some of the upcoming events that XBRL US has, we do have on March 28th a webinar, FASB webinar on the new 2017 US GAAP taxonomy. So that's March 28th. And March 29th, there's a webinar on also standards to automate processing for contractors, agents, and surety companies. That's really related to work and process work. So if anyone's interested in that, they can attend that. And then on April 5th, and the reason I didn't get into the IFRS stuff too much is the SEC will be talking about the IFRS taxonomy and what it means for foreign private issuers, XBRL providers, and data users. So if you're a foreign private issuer, or you're involved in helping them, you should definitely attend that webinar. And then in June, we're having an Inline XBRL workshop. We will go through in a lot more of the details associated with reporting in Inline XBRL.
Campbell, just very quickly, from the homepage of the XBRL US website, to get to the comment part of the Federal Registry, which is where you can load up your comments, click on the entry on our homepage that says Inline XBRL comment period. And then on the subsequent page, you'll find there's an SEC page, right? And also Federal Register details. Both of those destinations explain to you the process for providing comments. You can do so electronically through 3 different mechanisms. The Federal Register page also has the entire text of the proposal, so you can scan it quickly. You can also mark it up or download it to your local desktop to print off or to review away from the internet.
All right, thank you, David. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. And in terms of filings, someone had asked, there was a question about getting a copy of those Inline XBRL filings that have been published to date. What we can do is we'll get something done the next week of those companies that have filed an Inline XBRL. So that might be quite useful if people want to go and look at that. They can use as examples and they can see what's required. So thank you, everyone. And then the next webinar is the FASB webinar on March 28th for the 2017 US GAAP Financial Reporting Taxonomy.
Thanks for joining today, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.